We're live talking New York Jets football on the Ourlads Football Channel, on the Ourlads Football Network. I'm Greg DePalma, and thanks for tuning in. And anytime we talk about the New York Jets, this happens to be my favorite team, we bring in Matthew O'Leary from the Matthew O'Leary YouTube channel. Matt, good to talk to you again.
Greg, thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's awesome to have you on. It's a great time of year, Matt. This is what we all look forward to. Preseason game number 1 already in the book, so they're it's like, we're getting close. It's that first game action, so everything is really starting to ramp up here. A lot to talk about, and especially even over the last few hours, there's a lot to talk about regarding Mr. Reddick. So before we get into all that, how's everything going? How's the channel going, and how's the overall atmosphere regarding the fans and the viewers of your channel? What are they? What's their feeling right now?
Yeah, definitely excitement coming back. I've noticed ever since training camp opened up, the watch hours have gone up, and people are starting to make their way back to consuming football content after a little bit of some downtime in June and early July, but fan base is excited. I'm excited as well to cover this team every day on YouTube, and I think it's going to be an exciting season. So I'm very much so looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be so exciting. I mean, it's like I don't want to have the same feeling I had last year, because last year it was such a downer when Aaron was not available after that first. After those first few plays. So, but it's like, man, if you just have Aaron healthy this season. It's just so obvious, even just hearing a lot of the analysts who, for the most part, aren't kind to the New York Jets organization, to hearing most of them talk about how they believe the Jets are going to have a pretty good team this year, and sort of cements what we've felt, especially after a really good offseason. Again, Reddick we'll get into, but still, the talent's there. And if Aaron could just stay healthy, this is going to be a really fun ride.
Yeah, you said it. Health is going to be the key for this team. There's no debate about this Jets roster. It's a very good one. They should be a playoff team. Now it's about putting it on, from the paper onto the field and actually getting some wins here. But you're 100% right. I think, it's going to be an exciting season, and just hopefully they stay healthy.
All right. So let's get right into the news that just came on down the wire a little while ago. And Mr. Hassan Reddick has something to say. So, matter of fact, we can pop that on the screen here, because we're going to take a look also at the latest depth chart for the Jets from Ourlads.com. So everybody can check that out. And, of course, it's the best in the business. So we're going to go over the depth chart here at Ourlads real soon. But first of all, the New York Post, this is where I saw it. Reddick requests trade 4 months after they acquired him. And let's move on down here. And here it goes. Actually, this is where this is from what you hear. He has requested a trade from the New York Jets. Brian Costello confirmed. The New York Jets fired back, saying they were not going to trade the 29-year-old. And here's the key, and that is Joe Douglas talking about, he basically, this is a statement he made. We have informed Hassan that we will not trade him, that he is expected to be here with his teammates, that he will continue to be fined, etc. Since the trade discussions back in March, we have been clear, direct, and consistent with our position. Our focus will remain on the guys we have as we prepare, blah, blah, blah. So none of this is news to, I'm sure, you and I. We're not like some members of the media that don't want to understand the situation and think that Joe Douglas doesn't know what he's doing. But the fact is this is not something that we haven't seen before also from players like this, that in these contract situations. But you know what usually happens, Matt? And what we know usually happens, not even usually, it's like 99% of the time, the players know they have no leverage. The players will report. And Reddick will report because he has nothing else to do. What's he going to do? Sit out the season? No.
Yeah, exactly. He's in a spot where he can't afford to sit out the season. I think it's getting to a point where it's been a little frustrating. Like, I would just like to get him in here at this point. because we're getting a lot closer to the start of the regular season now, and they already missed preseason game, and not that he would play in it, but the training camp practices and getting up to speed in a ramp up period is important. I don't want it to just be like Reddick signs on Monday and then has to play a week later kind of a thing for the first game of the season. But it feels like neither side really wants to budge on this, but I think they're going to have to find some middle ground at some point. And even if it's just, reworking the deal for this year to get him some more guaranteed money, I think at a bare minimum, that's where this needs to start.
And maybe that's exactly what Reddick is looking for, knowing that he has no control. He just doesn't. We're going to get to that in a second, but why not try it? I mean, maybe that's the game plan all along is, look, I know I'm going to report. I'll be there. Who the heck wants to go to training camp? Who wants to go through all that stuff? We know how the veterans at this point in their career, we know how they act with training camp. They don't want to we'll work out when we want to work out. And he's getting fined, and I get that. I'm sure he's not happy about that. But it's probably what he's looking at, because he knows he has no leverage.
Right. He doesn't really have much leverage. He used, I think, his last leverage play by requesting the trade. At this point, I think is really the last thing to kind of stir the pot here. But, the Jets say that they're not going to trade him, and I don't expect them to. It's kind of just now up to like who's going to blink first at this point. It's kind of a waiting game. It's frustrating in a year where you're going for it and trying to win a Super Bowl. It leaves a little bit of a pit in your stomach thinking about and waiting for your star edge rusher to come in the building here. But at the end of the day, I do think something does get done and he gets in, but it's just the longer this drags on, I think the uglier it gets, and we're starting to see that a little bit now.
All right, so Mike Florio, Jet fan, comes with his story a few minutes ago, and it basically rips the Jets. What a surprise. So here he is trying to once again teach Joe Douglas how he should be running a football team, because Mike Florio knows how to run an NFL team and Joe Douglas doesn't. So it's very important that Mike Florio, you get these tips from Mike Florio. So he says no team should ever trade for a player who wants a new contract without negotiating a new contract at the time the trade is made. Okay, ever, no exceptions. Oh, thank you, Mike. Maybe Joe will learn his lesson from this. So here's the latest example. Reddick wanting a new contract, and now they're screwed. So according to Mike Florio, the Jets are screwed. So typical. And I'm sure when Reddick does end up putting the uniform on and playing in week 1 for the New York Jets, I doubt we're going to get any sort of retraction from Mike Florio. He'll still try to put it somehow that this was still the Jets' fault and he should never, this is going to be, I bet you the next thing that we'll talk about how it's going to be a distraction in the locker room, or he's just going to find a way to make sure that he's the one that looks good. Because again, the history, you could go through this and talk about, you could read this article if you want, obviously, anybody that's watching this. The fact is that, again, all you have to do is look at any player that's been in Hassan Reddick's position has either, yes, maybe he'll get a new contract, but they have never held out the whole season. Matter of fact, I can just recall the only player that I remember that held out the whole season was Le'Veon Bell. I'm not sure if I even recall of another. And look what happened to him.
Great point. Yeah, it's very rare that it gets into the season. I think last year, who was it? Jones on the Chiefs missed the first game of the year, but then something was done very shortly after that. So we've seen it go into the season before. It's rare that happens. I think it was Bosa in San Francisco. In San Francisco, also waited until September to sign. I don't know if he missed a regular season game or not, though. But moral of the story, as you said, it's not crazy uncommon to see a holdout go this long. Is it frustrating and nerve-wracking at times? Yes, that's, there's no denying that.
Yeah.
And like I said, it gets ugly at times, but I don't think the Jets are going to trade Hassan Reddick.
No.
that's a little bit much. I wouldn't say that they're screwed, but
No.
it's not ideal. It's fair to say that it's not ideal. Are they screwed? I don't know about that.
No. And to tell you the truth, I mean, let's think about the situation now. We know how important it is for the Jets to have more edge rush help like this. This is like the best edge rusher on the market, basically, that was available. So let's say you had to do this all over again and know that the Jets would be in this position and know that chances are that Reddick is still going to be available on opening day, or as you said, sometime even in September. But knowing that also, hey, there's this chance, is this 1% chance, or however percent chance you want to put it, that he just decides, I'm sitting out and I'm not going to play. Knowing all this, wouldn't you still just give up that 3rd round draft pick and just give it a chance, give it a shot?
Yeah, for that compensation at that point, yes. I think the pivot to Hassan Reddick after losing Bryce Huff, I thought was a good one. I was of the belief I wanted the Jets to keep Bryce Huff. I would rather, pay the ascending player and the guy entering his prime now rather than, the guy who's approaching 30. But once Huff leaves, that kind of goes out the window, right? And you're only left with what do you do now? And I think the pivot for, trading a 2026 third for Hassan Reddick was a wise decision. It's just a matter of getting him on the field at this point. And again, I still think he does. If I had to bet on it right now, I think he's in the lineup in week 1 against San Francisco. You just got to kind of tough it out now for the next few weeks until you get to that point.
Yeah, we'll see how it all works out. By the way, don't forget that the Jets were this close to signing Shaq Barrett. And if Barrett decides he's taking the deal with the Jets don't make this move. And so on one hand, we'll find out whether or not that would matter. Again, don't think it's going to, of course. Reddick will play. But look at what happened to Miami. I mean, all of a sudden, I'm out. I'm done. I'm not playing football no more. And that's going to hurt Miami a little bit, just a little bit, because they got edge rushers that they have to wait and see what kind of condition they're going to be in when they come back from the injuries they had last year. That's why they wanted Shaq Barrett. So that could have been the Jet situation. No Reddick. Keep your 3rd round pick in 2026. And then you're kind of screwed. You're really screwed because Shaq Barrett would have screwed you.
Yeah, that's for sure. If they signed someone and then he retired, I wonder what the articles would look like at that point.
Yeah, imagine. I'll leave that for the Miami press. Okay, so let's talk now about how the Jets fared at least a little bit in their preseason game, and there were some obvious standouts. And that there were several, 2 in the backfield, 1 on the defensive line, and definitely the one who seemed to be the player of the game, and that was Mr. Jarek Bernard Converse, who had a really good game, even though he gave up that first big pass of the game. It's like, I'm sorry, but I'm not even sure Sauce is knocking down that pass. That pass was perfect. So, but what we really liked was what Coach said, is that it was nice that he got beat on a play like that, and then it just didn't look like it mattered. It's like he just came right back, played some really good football, and the Jets that's something the Jets needed. We talked about that around draft time. We don't know whether DJ Reed's going to be back next year. We don't even know about Michael Carter. So it's very important for them to get some more corners in the system. And we know they're really high on Stiggers, which was nice. But Converse kind of lost year last year, didn't know what the Jets had. Now it looks like they have someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of what I saw out of Jarek Bernard Converse. I thought you brought up a really good point, too. The first drive of the game lets up a big play. I don't blame him for that at all. I think the coverage on the play was actually really good. It was just a perfect ball, and the wide receiver made a play. Sometimes you got to just tip your cap and say, all right, you got me on that one. But he stood tall the rest of the game, didn't really let up a whole lot after that, was around the ball, making tackles. And, the Jets could use some guys to develop behind, their big 3 starters, if you include Michael Carter in the slot. But, there's maybe some questions going into next year with DJ Reed on an expiring deal and Michael Carter on an expiring deal. What's the cornerback room going to look like a year from now? And while that's not an issue for this season, That's kind of what the preseason's about. You're kind of evaluating the lower part or your depth on the roster and seeing where you are going forward. And that's someone in Jarek Bernard Converse and Quantez Stiggers, another guy who they got a lot of playing time, and you're kind of seeing if these guys can play for you, maybe not this year, but down the line.
And also on defense, another player that we talked about on our draft coverage, and that is Leonard Taylor the third. So there was one play early on that I noticed him, and it was not a good play. I forget who it was that was running the ball for Washington, but I believe it was a running back, and it kind of bounced off of Taylor. I was like, oh, that's not good. And then all of a sudden, though, the next couple of plays were big plays, and it was nice to see. Again, it's early, but when you're a player like Taylor, who's battling maybe even with Watts and McGregor, but you got to believe Taylor and Watts are ahead of the game right now. These guys are trying to find a spot on the team because not everybody's going to make it. And Taylor seems to, at least for one preseason game, and again, we don't know what's going on in practice necessarily, but at least for one preseason game, looks like he's got a little bit of a heads up.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a strong performance. He had a big tackle for a loss, a sack later on in the second half. And, that's someone who I thought going into this draft was going to be picked. I was surprised to see him as a UDFA. The Jets grab him. I was excited about that. And in the first preseason game, I thought he made his presence felt. I agree with you. I think he's going to be fighting for a roster spot here. It's unfortunate the Jets have a really deep defensive line room, and there's going to be some guys who don't make this roster who I think can sign somewhere else if they don't make it to the practice, if they get picked up before making it to the practice squad, that is. It wouldn't surprise me. I think Leonard Taylor would be one of those guys if he doesn't make this team, but his performance on Saturday, I think, went a long way for him to actually make this team.
Yeah, I mean, look, the only other thing that could happen is I have no idea. I mean, who knows? I mean, let's just say the Reddick situation goes a week or two into the season. Well, that gives you a little bit more time to kind of figure things out, and maybe the perfect time because then they can maybe utilize the practice squad a little bit more to their favor because all the other teams will have made their moves. So that might actually come back to benefit the Jets at some point. This might actually hurt someone like, I don't know, maybe Tenzel Smart. We know he's always on the bubble. I know they're talking highly of Jalen Holmes. They seem to talk highly about him. And Takk McKinley's a kid. I'm not sure he's a kid anymore, but, he's an interesting veteran that I kind of like that pickup. And he's somebody that is nice insurance. So, but look, also injuries. And I think at some point, to have this type of depth in a very important position for the Jets, it shows you that, they've done a really good job in personnel here this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a lot of guys on that list who stood out in the training camp. McKinley, I thought early on in training camp really made a name for himself. And, same thing with Jalen Holmes. They're making plays, and that's what they're going to have to do in order to make this team. Tenzel Smart's kind of been on that bubble the last few years. I think it's an uphill battle for him, unfortunately, to make this roster, but they do have some depth, especially on the interior. So I'm excited to see the next, preseason game coming up against Carolina and then the Giants, and maybe we get a better idea of how this room's going to shake out.
What do you think about the call on Will McDonald?
This is the modern NFL, unfortunately. I don't think it was roughing the passer. I thought it was a little bit of a weak call, but you can't sneeze at the quarterback too hard, or otherwise you're going to get a penalty.
And I guess if it's going to happen, let it happen in the preseason when all you really care about is the play. You just care about the fact that the kid made a really good spin move, and that's exactly what we want to see out of Will McDonald. So
yeah, 100%. I mean, it was a really good rep from him for as a pass rush rep. So I think that's a positive. I'm going to lean into that a little bit more than the ticky-tack penalty.
All right, so let's stick with the defense just overall. What else have you noticed so far in camp, and what do you think when you take a look at the defense? The Jets play two linebackers. We know who they're going to be. I don't know if you've seen or heard anything regarding what that rotation might look like behind Williams and Mosley. Barnes is his second year. Again, talking about another player that seems to be getting some accolades, at least from what I've heard in the press conferences, is Sherwood. For me personally, I'd like to see it on the field more, uh, because he seems to be a kid that Coach Sal has really liked a lot. And I think at some point you do have to start showing that on the field. I'm not saying he hasn't recently, but and it's hard when there's only two linebackers in the system. You don't get much of an opportunity. But still, what have you heard regarding some of those other players on defense and some of the players that, especially some of the younger ones that are fighting for roster spots?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the linebacker room, we know who the two starters are going to be, but the staff absolutely loves Jamie Sherwood. So much so that he didn't play in the first preseason game. I thought he's had a really, really good camp. I think they're trying to groom him to be one of the next linebackers, maybe after CJ Mosley's time here is done, or we'll see what happens with Quincy Williams in a couple of years. But they like him, and I think he's played very strong. And then you look at the rest of it with Zaire Barnes and Chaz Surratt and Sam Iguavoen. Those are guys who have also just made plays in training camp. I think it's going to be a little bit of a battle between those three for that fourth linebacker spot here with the Jets. Surratt, I mean, last year during Hard Knocks, Robert Saleh was talking him up like he was, going to be an all-pro that season. He loves that guy, and Barnes is someone that they used to pick on last year's draft. But I think they're confident that one of those three are going to be able to jump in and be that fourth linebacker and probably play a pretty big role on special teams too, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Barnes is the one that interests me because I know, he's a fast kid. He actually seemed to be around the ball pretty, a few times in the game. And yeah, I think they're in pretty good shape. I really do with Sherwood and Barnes. So, by the way, how surprised were you when that top 100 list came out? I don't know if did you get a chance to take a look at it and see that who the number one Jet was on the list?
The number one Jet on the list, who ended up being the number one Jet? I saw it trickling in, but
it was Quincy Williams.
Okay.
Quincy Williams was the number one as far as the players' top 100. Not Sauce, not Garrett, but Quincy Williams.
Good for him. Yeah, I know Sauce came in at 30, and I thought that was a little bit low there.
Yeah.
But that is surprising. I like Quincy Williams. I think he really came out strong last year, and in my opinion is a top 5 linebacker in the sport. But yeah, that's surprising, and I hope he builds off of it and becomes even better this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. Man, let him loose. I want to see him rush the passer some more. I know how important he is in coverage, but I'd still like to see him. He had the whole offseason to kind of find a way to get him to the quarterback too. Okay, so let's move on over to the offense. And speaking of players who performed well in the preseason game, Braylon Allen certainly has looked the part, and he's looked like this ever since rookie camp. And showed a good look on Saturday afternoon, or when was it? Yeah, Saturday afternoon. And Isaiah Davis had the initial blunder, but then he came back. And what you notice really about these two guys is their speed. The speed is evident. And Allen just, you knew watching Wisconsin play football that this kid was going to be a talented running back. He has the size. He's just one of those, but it's Wisconsin. And, you've kind of seen these kids in Wisconsin before, and then they just don't ever translate to the next level for whatever reason. And then Allen didn't have a great year with the transition scheme last year. So there's still a lot of questions, but boy, does he look the part.
Yeah, he really did look the part, man. And at training camp, I could say the same thing from, when I've been up there and seen them, but it's really impressive. And he's still so young too, at just 20 years old, but already, at times look dominant. I mean, when he gets to the second level, he's very, very tough to bring down. Doesn't have that same breakaway speed that like a Breece Hall does, but different styles when they hit that next level. And for the Jets, who are expecting to have more leads in 2024, I think when they're trying to close out games and wear down opposing defenses, that's going to be when we see Braylon Allen really get a role here and perform well in this offense.
I wonder what the situation is going to be with Abanaconda. I wonder if the Jets are just going to go ahead with three. I mean, of course, they could always, look, Ferkster's back too. So you wonder about that extra fullback spot that doesn't get used very often, but still special teams, having a guy that can block if you want him kind of helps, especially in this system. So it'll be interesting to see how they work that out. I can't imagine if he's playing pretty well that they would just give up on him. Maybe they trade him. That's a possibility. But I just don't see Abanikanda getting waived or anything like that. I think the worst case scenario for him not being a Jet is that everybody's healthy, which is a good thing for us, and they just don't want to keep 4 running backs. So we'll go ahead and make a deal and send him somewhere where he can play.
Yeah, I think that's where this is going to end up, unfortunately for him. I mean, just when you watch the practices, or even if you're not there and you just see the updates, like, he is very far down on the pecking order. He wasn't even listed on the depth chart as one of the return guys too, which I was a little surprised about. I thought maybe that would be a spot for him to stick on this team, but to me, it seems like Braylon Allen definitely jumped him. I think he by far has cemented himself as the second best running back here.
Yep.
And even Isaiah Davis, I think, they're running with a little bit more of a power style run offense this year, it looks like. And Izzy Abanikanda is more that prototypical, Shanahan style West Coast back. And maybe they just don't see a fit anymore. And, it's tough for a guy you used a draft pick on last year, but the writing was on the wall a little bit when they drafted 2 guys this year in the draft at the same position. So, unfortunately for Izzy, I think I would be surprised at this point if he made the roster. Crazier things have happened, but I just think it looks like signs are pointing to him not being a Jet.
And the good thing is there's depth. So if there is an injury to one of the 2 rookies, which we don't want to see, then hey, it's obviously you're in good shape there. Izzy's there, and you don't have to make any moves. So there's that. But yeah, here's the other thing that we talked about too, is that not only are we looking ahead next year at, say, DJ Reed and others, but as we talked about before, looking ahead next year on how we're going to have to look ahead the next season with those 2022 draft picks. And Breece Hall is one of them. And I'm not just talking about the 3 first rounders who you're going to have option deals with, but also Allen Hall's. That's nothing to worry about. It's the second round draft pick, but all those top 3 first round picks at Hall, they also get paid. And you just wonder whether or not this was part of that. This was a look into the future in case we can't pay Breece Hall in a couple of years. Let's get a head start, and let's get a couple of guys in here to at least give us insurance, number one, and number two, give us insurance that in case a couple of years down the road we're not able to afford Breece Hall.
Exactly, and I think it's a good contingency plan to have. And even in the short term, I think both of those guys, but especially Braylon Allen, is going to give you enough to where it's more than valid to have used a 4th round pick on the guy. Again, I think he's going to be a solid running back too behind Breece Hall. And if they're running a lot in the second half, which I fully expect them to do, having someone that you could lean on and really wear down a defense is going to be so important. And it also keeps Breece Hall fresh a little bit too.
Yep.
Like, that's another thing we didn't even get to yet is, yes, Breece Hall can be and should be your bell cow back, but you don't have to run him 400 times this year. You could save a little bit of his legs with a guy like Allen.
Yeah. That's what we want to see in these games. Also, a couple of quarterbacks got an opportunity to play that, and I don't know what's going to happen, but one of these guys is going to end up on the practice squad, either Peasley or Martinez. They both looked okay, but you know what? I think Martinez may not be a bad stash guy on your practice squad, because Jordan Travis is probably not going to do much this year at all. So, and look, we don't ever want to talk about 3rd string quarterbacks again. That's for sure. It's not about that, but someone might be kept. And I think Martinez showed that he's an interesting guy. He had a really good career in college, and he's athletic and all that, make plays. So I think that's a nice little battle going on between Martinez and Peasley. And I think Martinez, again, if they keep one of those guys in the practice squad, he probably has a leg up as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I would agree. I was, pleasantly surprised with Martinez. I can't say I saw a ton of him in the UFL, but I know he made a lot of plays there
Yep.
and comes in and is doing the same thing. He has the scramble ability with his legs, and he felt comfortable, tucking it and running. If there's pressure in his face, he wasn't, bailing out and throwing it away right away, or even the thing that drives me nuts when young quarterbacks run out of bounds for a loss instead
Oh
of
yeah,
yeah,
that's right. That one play he made. Yeah.
yeah, but right, like it's even avoiding that, I think
Yep.
is a positive, but he's gonna have a tough time to make the roster. Like
Oh yeah.
Tyrod's your backup, and he's one of the better backups in the league. But even if Jordan Travis has to start on IR, I think Martinez is someone that you try to keep on your practice squad and just keep in the building.
What do you think about the tight end situation? Ruckert's a little banged up, but nothing serious. We know that they're the top two guys with Conklin. Um, I don't know where Kuntz. I don't know what you saw, whether or not he is in that battle with Yeboah. Whether or not who has the leg up in your opinion for that number 3 job.
Yeah, I do think it's Kenny Yeboah. I know that Zach Kuntz is really big. He's like 6'7" and just like freakish size, and a lot of people like that trait about him. I just haven't really seen it on the practice field or in game, but
Okay.
Yeboah's been a reliable special teamer also. So I would imagine that in those kind of positional battles, they're going to default to the guy who's going to give you a little bit more on specials. He might not have that same ceiling maybe that Kuntz does, but I think he has a higher floor and gives you some value on special teams. So to me, I think Yeboah is in the driver's seat for that one, and Kuntz is going to have a big couple games here to get himself back in the race.
Yeah, we'll see if again, not sure if they're going to keep 3 or 4 tight ends, but I'm not sure. I guess like you said, I guess we'll find out. And again, barring injuries or anything like that, it's good. It's good competition in the back end. Okay, and then wide receivers. Of course, Garrett Wilson's the man, but Mike Williams back in action on the practice field. No more injury designation. And all of a sudden, in practice, from what I've been hearing, there seems to be an Alan Lazard sighting or two. Like, this is the guy that we thought we were going to have last year. Now, the regular season hasn't begun yet, and Rodgers did play with Lazard in the preseason last year or in the practices last year. So, but it's just nice to see that he's not like having a bad camp. Like, he's mentally let it bother him, because the Jets are stuck with Lazard, and he is going to be an important part of the offense. The Jets have Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson, but pretty much after that, to have a reliable number 3, Gibson's still a young kid. That's important. And maybe Lazard, at least at this point, looks like he's got his confidence back.
Yeah, I think that's going to be big for the Jets. Even if Lazard can be a functional fourth receiver, that's such a win after what he gave them last year. Obviously they paid him to be closer to a number 2 receiver, and I don't think he's going to be that, but just getting him back to being a functional NFL wide receiver is a win in my book. And with Gibson and Corley in the slot, I think those are 2 guys who have a little bit of different skill set. Gibson's more of that shifty and speedy guy, and Corley has the power and yards after the catch ability running the ball, and that's going to be exciting. But Mike Williams coming back and looking good is going to be a big thing for this Jets wide receiver room, because without Williams after Garrett, it felt like you had a bunch of number 3 and 4s and not really anyone who could fill that number 2 role. But Mike Williams getting back in the fold, I think, is really big for the Jets.
And Garrett certainly looks like he is in beast mode already. And each year that these guys, I mean, we've seen a lot out of Garrett Wilson and Sauce and so forth, but we know there's even more that these kids can give, whether it's Sauce with more takeaways and game-changing type plays, and Garrett, of course, having a quarterback that he can rely on and put up big numbers. So it's coming. We know that. All right, what about, because this is a deep group that'll all be fighting for like probably that one more spot. And there's a lot to like. I mean, Brownlee still scored a touchdown. I don't see any way that he's not going to make it. So right there, you're looking at, say, 6, because of the fact that Charles is going to be your gunner, right? Is Charles the gunner on the team now? Is he the number 1 gunner?
I would think so. After losing Justin Hardy, I would assume that he's going to be the gunner.
Okay. So I don't know. Maybe this is where you're having that debate about, well, we're going to trade a bit of conduct. We're going to Kuntz and Yeboah are going to have to battle for the spot because we're going to need that seventh receiver. I could see that possibly happening. And of course, after what happened also to Brandon Smith in the game on Saturday. Look, he's not making the team, but that's nice to see. It's nice to see some of these young kids making plays, and even Harrell made a play. So, I mean, Taylor's got some experience, and we talked about Charles probably with the inside track because he's the gunner. Yeah, I mean, I like what I see as far as the depth. I don't think I've ever seen this much solid depth. I'm not calling these guys superstars, but for a 5 or 6 or 7 receiver, player, I don't think I remember a time where we've had this much depth.
Yeah, I think that's a good point there. I'm a big Jason Brownlee guy. I like him. I'm rooting for him to make the roster here. And even Malik Taylor is someone who Aaron Rodgers had a little bit of a rapport with in Green Bay, and he adds a deep threat element to this offense too. So that's another name that I would throw in there. But yeah, we've seen in the second half of these preseason games, we've seen some names get tossed around there, but the Jets. It's going to be a tough decision if they want to keep 6 or 7 or who that 7th guy is going to be. Unfortunately, we talked about it on the defensive line. You might have to move on from someone you might not want to. The same thing could be said about this wide receiver room.
Yeah, what do you think? Because again, we know it's going to be Williams, Wilson, Gibson, Lazard. Again, I think Charles is just a cinch because he's the gunner. I don't think he's not making it. We know Corley's making it. That's 6 right there. So do you think if everybody's healthy, do you think they stick at 6, or do you think it's going to be 7 and Brownlee's going to be the guy that ends? Because if they're going to be 7, Brownlee's definitely making the team.
Yeah, I think it's 7 with Brownlee is going to be my guess. That they did that last year as well. And that's how both Gibson and Brownlee made the roster. But it's tough. It's really tough. And with the state of this team, like if you're going to carry 7 wide receivers, then you gotta shed some fat somewhere else on this roster, which is easier said than done.
And then finally, the offensive line. And I know we're not going to really see most of these guys. Tippmann was the only one to get in there, but that was a big story. And I personally thought it was a little bit overblown, but look, because it's camp, it's practice. This is what happens. This is why you practice. This is why you try to get better and get all the bad stuff out early, especially after an off season. And it is still early, even though Tippmann played in the game and did not have any high throws. So I look at it in both respects. I'm not going to say that it's unimportant that he had some bad snaps in practice and then didn't have any bad snaps in the preseason. In the same respect, you could flip it and say, well, it was only one preseason. He still has to come out there in the next preseason game and in practice this week and not have any of those yips, which is at this point really what it is, because we've never seen him have these problems before. But again, it was positive that he didn't have any snap issues in the game on Saturday.
Yeah, without a doubt. I was glad to see that from Tippmann, and that's why I think he was the lone starter that played. They kind of wanted to get him that game experience and was going to see what happened, and he passed with flying colors. So unless he has a setback this week, I don't know if we see him in this game coming up against Carolina. It doesn't sound like the Jets are going to play their starters, but for Tippmann, I thought seeing the snaps improve in practice last week and then in the game is a positive side and size. Yeah, and we could maybe put that behind us now at this point.
Yeah. All right. So what do you think as far as the competition? We know, of course, you got Fashanu and Mitchell, I would think, and Carter, I would think are what you would call locks or as close to lock. We know Fashanu's a lock, but Mitchell and Carter, Warren, you would think that they're as close to a lock as that's out there. What do you think? Do you agree with that? And then what do you think about how they might round out the rest of the offensive line? Because after what happened last year, this is where you would think that they probably would want to keep an extra guy that they wouldn't normally.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Fashanu, Warren, and Mitchell make the team. On the interior, I really liked what I saw from Xavier Newman in that preseason game. I thought he looked good at left guard. There were a couple times where he more so in the run game than I would say in pass protection. But he also had that big moment last year playing center against the Giants. So for some of those depth guys on the interior, I thought Newman stood out as a positive, and maybe he's someone who's closer to making this team.
Yeah, Hanson's also someone that got some good experience last year, had a really good college career. So he really shouldn't be someone to take lightly as far as a backup. But before I kind of wrap this up, one of the things that I think is real important is our injuries, and it's going to be. This is just the team. This is it. I say this every year, but everybody knows that it's such a big deal, the injuries with the Jets, and whether or not they're going to be able to look. Everyone's going to get hurt. Everyone's going to have players injured, but just keep the key guys healthy. Just have a relatively healthy, normal season for a playoff team, because most playoff teams don't have to deal with a lot of injuries, and especially the ones competing for a championship. I say this every time I turn on the press conference from Coach Saleh, all I'm looking for in that first couple of seconds, because I don't know what happened that day or earlier in the day. I'm usually not getting blasted with any kind of news. I'm busy doing other stuff. So the first thing I'm hoping for that he talks about is, I just don't want to hear him say anything about anybody got hurt. That's it. And today I see in the very beginning of the press conference, he goes, and I don't know, something, usually you miss stuff in the first few seconds. He says, well, besides Jimmy and the ACL, everybody else seems to be okay. And I'm like, who the fuck's Jimmy? I mean, who's Jimmy? I don't know who Jimmy is. Is that a nickname? So I'm looking through the depth chart to find out, oh my Lord, who's Jimmy? And I realized after looking at the depth chart and not looking at the bottom where his name would have been, I'm actually, let me see if he's there on the Ourlads depth chart. At the bottom, he's not even there. So I was like, I got stumped, luckily. So I guess I found out who it was. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Is it Ciarlo?
I believe so. Yeah. The linebacker.
The linebacker, yeah. So anyway, sigh of relief. Whew. But that's kind of going to be the deal, man. It's just every press conference during training camp and the preseason, just lead that off without having to say anything about anybody getting hurt.
Yeah, that's really the key for this team. And unfortunately, last year we saw it right away. The first game of the year, Rodgers goes down, and that really did change everything. I know it sounds so cliche to bring up, but it's the truth. That really changed their season, and the offensive line injuries as well didn't help things.
Oh, yeah.
And you're just hoping this year to be somewhat healthy. I mean, they're due for a healthy season after all these years of some rough sledding in that department. So, hopefully the football gods are looking out for them and they can stay a little healthy.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the same thing. We were overhyped last year. Now there's a lot of there's still some doubters out there, which they should be, because that's how I am. I mean, look, I know how talented they are, but I'm not going to disrespect the Bills or the Dolphins by picking the Jets ahead of them, because the Jets don't deserve to be picked ahead of the Dolphins or the Bills at this point, even though we know on paper the Jets are just as talented as those teams, but they have to prove it. So we'll see if they can go ahead and do that. By the way, any news on Vera Tucker in one way or another? Because obviously him being healthy and playing and practicing, that's what we're hoping for. And is everything kind of ahead of plan, ahead of schedule, on schedule?
Yeah, I would say on schedule with him. It's been, pretty normal in training camp. Haven't really heard a lot of his name, which I usually associate that as being a good thing for offensive linemen when you're not hearing their names, because it usually means they're getting beat. So he's been out there. He's been doing the team drills. So I think all signs point to Vera Tucker being back. And that's another one that's got to stay healthy, man, because the offense looks like it changes for the worse anytime he leaves.
Yeah, and it's always like around the same time of year. But they're not playing in Denver this year, right?
True.
No Denver games.
No Denver game.
And I tell you right now, if they were playing in Denver this year, I'd want them to hold them out. Just don't play them. Just don't even play. I don't care. Just don't play them. Skip it. Give them a week off. All right, Matt. So what's going on with the channel? As you said at the open, talking about the Jets on the channel every day. And that's what I really like about the channel, is that you're just constantly, daily, just coming out and just, no matter what it is, it's just a daily dose of just Jet stuff. And that's what's really cool.
Yeah, so you said it, every day updates. Right now is training camp updates. So every day after practice, I'll do a recap of what the biggest thing was that day, or things to watch for going forward. And we're in game preview season now too. We had our first game preview before the Commanders game. So later on in the week, we'll give you everything you need to know heading into this preseason game against the Panthers. And before we know it, it'll be time for the regular season.
Yep, can't wait. We'll talk at some point for sure early on in the season, because I just want to get through at least a game before you and I talk again, so we can actually have something to talk about with Aaron Rodgers as a New York Jet on the football field in the regular season.
That sounds good to me. Hopefully it's a little bit longer than 4 plays, and would love to come back on.
Yeah, that'd be great. We like having you on, of course, Matt, and we look forward to having you on again. So, enjoy everything that's going on between now and the start of the regular season, and we'll look to talk to you sometime, hopefully in September.
Sounds good. Thanks again for having me.
You got it. Thanks, Matt.